Hey everyone, welcome back. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to invoke API from Azure, and the specific model we're going to be dealing with today is DeepSeek R1. And that's right, it's finally released on January 29th, which is today. We finally have this model available on Azure AI Foundry. So I come across this blog and I read through it and I thought, hey, what an interesting episode, right? So let's get things started. First things first, you will need an Azure account. So you go to Azure AI Foundry, go to model endpoints, you can stand up an endpoint. The steps here is to click on deploy model, and then you can type in DeepSeek. All you gotta do is say confirm, and you can stand up your own endpoint. Once you stood up the endpoint, you can then click on open in Playground. So once you're in Playground mode, you can then talk to it, right? In this chat session here, you can say, tell me a joke, and it will actually tell you a joke. Now, what you actually realize here is the answer is very long, much longer than the answer that you commonly see from ChatGPT 4.0 or other foundational models, things like that. So here, I actually ask a question: why do we have to learn operation management as an MBA student? Here's going to be a bunch of answer. I'm not even going to try to read or make sense out of it. But you can kind of see the structure of this answer, which I can say it's pretty heuristic. I think some of these might actually be good points, which actually makes me want to read some of these things like that. I actually stopped here. I think that's because the token is maxed out on 1024, which is why I stopped here. So there you go. That's kind of like a small playground mode, right? And now the interesting part is how to invoke this, right? How to interact with this model endpoint programmatically. So the way to do that is to view code. Click on the button, it'll give you the Python code just like that. So it's as easy as that. Boom, there you go. You have your model endpoint. You can invoke it. You can talk to it, right? So let's go to a Colab notebook. First things first, obviously you want to keep installed Azure AI Inference. Once you install it successfully, you're going to have to enter API key. And then I literally just copy paste the API from Azure website down to the cell in my Colab notebook. And then you run it, you're going to get some sort of response back regarding the history of this conversation here in the list of JSON file, right? So same as what we talked about in previous video, the message body is constructed using a data type list of dictionary, which is what I'm going to do next to construct a useful class object for me to give myself a helpful and also efficient conversation environment. So how does it work is I'm going to design a chatbot class object to which there's going to be a couple of init. In the init, obviously, number one is API key, endpoint, things like that. After that, we have client. That's pretty much it. The important thing here is to manage the history. So history is important because that is the main body that goes into the message, of which it will carry all of the information that the API call required. Here, the main function is this invoke API method. In this method, obviously, there's payload, and then you can make an API call. We also have a helper function here called collapse response, to which it will actually strip out the white spaces in the content to give us a complete answer. Last but not least, you want to display the history if the user desires. So that's pretty much it. That's the class object. Now you want to kind of design a conversational environment such that the conversation will continue. So you'll ask the user for input, and then whatever the user input is, we're gonna make an API call to get some response back. And then that iteration continues until user hit keywords, trigger words, such as quit or exit the program. So I have the following code here that essentially it's a while loop that will continue the conversation by allowing user to input some sort of sentence, and then we're gonna append the history, get the history into the message body, make an API call, get the response back from the API call, and then display the response from DeepSeek model. So that's the structure of simple code to help us invoke the conversation environment, and then we can talk to it, right? For example, here, what is 1+1? The foundational model DeepSeek actually knows to think about it, right? So when you see bracket think, it actually is the chain of thought process carried out by DeepSeek, which I thought is interesting. and it's definitely something unique that other foundational model usually did not have. Once you finish thinking, it will then give you a final answer. So I think you can argue that this is probably a little bit of overkill because considering my question is just what is 1 + 1? So I will say this is probably too much of an answer. To answer that, the answer is 2, right? And it can answer something else, right? For example, write a hello world Python function. It actually show you the thought process before it write out the Python function. So there you go. Hopefully you like this episode. Hopefully it's a quick episode to show you how you can create a safe space for yourself to invoke API endpoint of DeepSeek model from Azure without having to log into DeepSeek using your own personal information. Everything's on the cloud, which is on Azure. So hopefully you find this episode interesting. Hopefully this sheds some light of how you can create a safe space for yourself to invoke DeepSeek API. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like.